Overproduction's been the talk of the town lately, and boy, is it a hot topic. To be fair, the term itself isn't off the mark. It's especially on point if you're zooming in on powerhouses like the developed countries and China. In these big economies, overproduction might actually be hitting the nail on the head. Just look at the past 50 years, we've seen a total shakeup in farming tech and massive mechanization. Now one farmer with their fancy gadgets can handle thousands of acres. It's mind-blowing. Most folks have waved goodbye to field work, thanks to combine harvesters and high-tech drones taking over. And guess what? The big 8 economies are seeing their factories go down the same road as farms. Remember those poor souls who spent their days turning screws? Well, they're slowly but surely being shown the door by Robotron assembly lines. AI is skyrocketing to new heights. Smart machines will soon replace workers performing routine mental tasks. Back in the day, we used to crack jokes about what to do when we hit rock bottom. Go to a factory and tighten screws. That punchline's lost its humor now. Soon enough, we won't even get through the factory doors. It's all robotic arms in there. Just a couple of engineers can run a massive automated plant now and churn out enough industrial goods to supply millions upon millions of people. This isn't some sci-fi fantasy anymore. It's becoming our new reality, bit by bit. Today's surplus of stuff isn't quite the same beast as the overproduction paradox Marx was dealing with back in the day. The whole overproduction thing in the 19th century, it was mostly about the unfair slice of the pie situation in capitalism's early days, which meant production couldn't really cover everyone's basic needs. Instead, most folks were too broke to buy stuff, so there wasn't enough demand to go around. Back then, as traditional industries and jobs faded away, new ones were popping up left and right. It was like a seesaw. One goes down, the other comes up. But boy, things today, they're a whole different ballgame from the 19th century. Sure, we've still got that pesky wealth gap, but with our supercharged productivity, that doesn't really explain the whole picture anymore. From farm to factory, if it's a basic necessity and not some fancy custom-made luxury, we're cranking it out at mind-blowing speeds. Feeding the whole world? Piece of cake. With robots and machines doing most of the heavy lifting, we need way fewer people to make all this stuff than there are folks looking for work. And don't even get me started on AI. It's racing ahead at warp speed. Traditional jobs are vanishing in the blink of an eye. And new job opportunities, they're totally lagging behind. So what we're seeing in today's big economies isn't just a little extra, it's overflow central. Trust me, this is nothing like what went down in the 19th century. We're producing more goods than people want. Supply is exceeding demand significantly. This shakeup in our stuff-centric world is a crazy game of dominoes. As time ticks on, it's like a ripple effect, splashing into every corner of our society and culture. So, how does all this extra stuff mess with our culture? Well, the folks making all this stuff, they're becoming ghosts, and it's way beyond just not appreciating them anymore. It's like poof, your desk disappears into thin air and somehow things run even smoother. How crazy is that? It's not that making stuff isn't important anymore, it's just that we're swimming in products these days. So now the people making all this stuff, they're a dime a dozen. Look at it this way, we need air way more than gold, right? But gold's worth its weight, while air's just there. Air, on the other hand, totally free, no strings attached. So these product makers are kind of like air, we can't live without them, but they're so easy to replace that we end up taking them totally for granted. Ouch, right? On Chinese social media, this overproduction problem spawned a whole trend, the quit while you can movement. Basically, it's when industry old-timers who've been around the block a few times start raining on the parade of newbies and wannabes. They paint this gloomy picture of the industry's future, going on about crummy pay, deadened careers, and soul-crushing work conditions. They're telling newbies to jump ship ASAP before they get burned. This whole quit while you're ahead craze kicked off around 2010. Biology was the first field to get hit with this trend. Back then, biology grads were struggling like crazy to land a job. It made you wonder if you'd made a huge mistake. The trend spread to chemistry, materials, and environmental sciences. These STEM fields were already tough for finding jobs. Then came 2015, and things got real. Even old school fields like civil and mechanical engineering, known for their tough work conditions, started feeling the heat. Before you knew it, pretty much every traditional engineering field was on the get out while you can list. Recently, as the tech industry started slashing jobs left and right, even the once golden world of computer science couldn't dodge the quit now bullet. 2024, suddenly everyone's scrambling for civil service exams, a career U-turn. Law and other civil service exam subjects are still hot stuff. They're all the rage right now, but government jobs are limited and can only take in so many people. Most exam takers are just along for the ride. Deep down, we all know the score. If a couple of majors were falling out of favor, you could chalk it up to hiccups in specific sectors. Or maybe higher ed's just out of sync with job markets, causing a temporary mismatch. But when every field's getting the boot, that's not just your run-of-the-mill market hiccup. Or maybe the job market isn't even the real problem here. It's just where society has naturally ended up at this point in time. A few years back, Chinese netizens loved to poke fun at Westerners, calling them baizuo, or naive liberals. They'd say these Westerners couldn't care less about actual production, and were too busy squabbling over pointless stuff like race issues and minority rights. They'd even joke that these folks probably think groceries magically appear on supermarket shelves. Sure, we can roll our eyes at how ridiculous this society is, but let's be real for a second. This kind of society might just be what you get when everyone's swimming in stuff. In these super productive developed countries, most folks can cruise through life without ever having to lift a finger to make the stuff they need to survive. They just get to kick back and enjoy the goodies. If you've seen that viral video from the famous Chinese lecturer Ding Pengzi, you'll know just how crazy abundant the food supply is in the US. There's enough to hand out free meals to homeless folks on the streets every day, no strings attached. Sure, it's basically just the scraps from mass production, but hey, food is food. It's not exactly gourmet stuff. The taste and looks are pretty meh, to be honest. But when it comes to keeping people alive, oh, it's more than enough, no doubt about it. So in this kind of setup, most folks just expect stuff to magically appear on shelves, and the people actually making things, they're either looked down on or totally ignored. Instead, everyone's busy with stuff that doesn't produce a thing. Let's face it, once we're comfortable and we're not stressing about our next meal, we start pouring our energy into other stuff. Who cares if it's useful or not? At least I don't have to stress about where my next meal's coming from. As China's economy skyrockets and its industries boom, Chinese society is starting to follow the same path we've been talking about. It's not just about food anymore. We're talking everyday stuff that makes life tick. Think clothes, toiletries, and those handy little gadgets for your home. Heck, we're even talking big-ticket items like cars. If you're not hung up on fancy brands or trying to impress anyone, and just want something that does the job, you'll be amazed at how dirt cheap this stuff can be. It's surprisingly easy to cover your basic needs these days. So, with all this going on, now that most folks aren't just scraping by anymore, they've started obsessing over the next big hurdle in life. You know, these issues take on different flavors depending on where you are in the world. In the States, it's all about race and LGBTQ+ stuff. Over in China, it's the rat race and the whole keeping up with the Joneses thing. The kicker? These issues don't just vanish as the economy grows or tech improves. I mean, racial differences are here to stay, and there's always going to be someone on top of the social ladder. But here's the thing about all of this. No matter how rich we get or how fancy our gadgets are, these issues aren't going anywhere. Let's face it, racial differences aren't just going to disappear overnight. And this whole gotta be on top mentality, it's like a never-ending headache for society. So, what I'm getting at is this. We're stuck in this endless game with no finish line in sight. And guess what? This endless rat race is driving us all crazy. It's got us all gasping for air, myself included. Talk about a major buzzkill. No wonder terms like studyaholics and rat race are giving more and more young folks major headaches these days. In this age of stuff we don't need overload, we're churning out more and more human cogs for the production machine. And then boom, they realize they've become about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Suddenly, they're not society's golden children anymore, a fall from grace. So picture this whole mess, and then imagine these folks still stuck in their grandpa's work ethic, thinking they can save their way to the top. As if! Want to know how that usually pans out? They end up about as useful as a screen door on a submarine and get shoved into a cookie cutter job. How's that for a life plan? Nowadays, it's not stuff we're short on, it's feels. Emotions are the new gold, folks. From wacky live streams to pretend begging in the States, or fake cooking yourself in a pot. Heck, even chomping on lighters. The internet's got it all. Believe it or not, these bonkers stunts actually have a bright side for society. They pack more punch than your average Joe tightening screws or even eggheads doing research. So guess what? Society's throwing cash and fame at these emotion peddlers more than it did for eager beavers in the production line. Those bookworms from small towns, they're left in the dust despite their best efforts. Internet jesters are now the toast of the town, raking in the dough and basking in the spotlight. Meanwhile, the folks actually making stuff, they're shoved to the sidelines, practically invisible. It's a head scratcher that's giving every developed economy a run for its money these days. Is this overproduction really the whole picture? But is that really the whole story of our time? Let's zoom out a bit and look beyond just the rich countries. What about the rest of the world? You might be surprised to learn that this whole overproduction thing, it's kind of misleading. While 3 billion folks in developed countries are fretting over having too much stuff, there's another 5 billion people who are scraping the bottom of the barrel just to survive. Most of the world isn't craving bubble tea or gadgets, but basic necessities like food and shelter. They're desperate for reliable power and clean water, not to mention healthcare or schooling. They're out of luck on all fronts. After 3 years in Africa, whenever I see people talking about overproduction online, I can't help but feel a pang of guilt in my heart. Halfway across the globe, where people struggle to meet their basic needs, we're fretting over excess. Talk about a twisted world. Technically speaking, accessing these resources shouldn't be a big deal. Africa's got tons of farmable land just waiting to be used, and developed countries have been going crazy with fancy farming tech for ages. But the reality? It's enough to make you want to look away. All that land's just sitting there, going to waste, while millions of Africans are still fighting off hunger day after day. Africa's packed with perfect spots for hydro plants. Building hydropower plants? That's so last century it's a piece of cake. Setting up power and water? No rocket science needed. It's not like we're trying to colonize Mars. But here's the kicker. In the real world, over half of Africa's population is living in the dark ages. No electricity, zilch, or they've got it but can't use it. While Africa's in the dark, millions in electricity takes a daily ocean cruise. A shocking waste. Now about those health issues in Africa, we're not talking about some crazy obscure diseases here. We're talking run-of-the-mill stuff that's a cinch to treat. A quick checkup, pop a few pills, and boom, problem solved. And here's the thing, churning out these meds, it's not gonna break the bank. Just get these pills to the people who need them. Make sure they take them on time. Many in Africa could see health improvements. However, most sick people there face a healthcare crisis with few doctors or medications available. Powerless against the onslaught of pain and sickness. With over half the world's population struggling for basic necessities, can we really talk about overproduction in developed economies? I don't think we've earned that right. Sure, overproduction is a real issue, but zoom out to the global picture and this so-called surplus, it's a total myth. Looking at it this way, Marx's theory about lack of effective demand, still totally relevant. Just swap developed countries for the rest of the world, and you'll see what I mean. Now, about those 3 billion folks in rich countries, all that postmodern nonsense they've cooked up because they've got too much stuff. It was kind of cute when they kept it in their little bubble, I guess. But stack it up against the 5 billion people fighting to survive in absolute poverty. It's honestly laughable when you think about it. In our super productive world today, how on earth is extreme poverty still a thing in most of the world? Let's be real, tech isn't the issue here. It's not about how much we can produce. It's about how messed up our economic relationships are. These days, having resources and needing them are two totally different stories. A handful of rich countries have all the tools to make the good stuff, so of course, they get to call the shots on who gets what. Meanwhile, developing countries, like many in Africa, are desperately in need of basic necessities. But since they don't have the factories and tech, they're totally left out of the decision-making process. Forget about calling the shots in their own lives. Across most of Africa, the big shots and power players are basically on Western nations' payroll, especially their old colonial masters. They're basically helping their ex-colonizers plunder their own backyard, pocketing a few crumbs in the process, while the old masters walk away with the jackpot. And guess what? In return, these ex-colonizers throw a protective blanket over these local bigwigs and keep them cozy. And when their time in power's up, these elites don't hang around. They often hightail it to their sugar daddy countries, stuffing their pockets with the nation's wealth on the way out. On paper, colonialism is dead and buried, but in reality, it's alive and kicking through this new puppet master setup. So where does all this money end up? Whether it's lining the pockets of ex-colonial bigwigs or being snatched up by their local yes-men, none of it's turning into actual wealth for the country or helping to boost its economy. Bottom line, this cash isn't doing squat to help the locals survive or thrive. Now you might be wondering about these ex-colonial powers and their Western buddies. Do they lend a helping hand to Africa and other developing nations? Well, to be fair, yeah, they do pitch in. But get this, that help is actually another stumbling block for Africa's progress. Year after year, the global community pours a ton of cash and goodies into African countries. We're talking a smorgasbord of stuff: food, industrial gear, meds, you name it. But here's the kicker. On the ground, it's a whole different story. Turns out all this aid isn't really helping Africa. In fact, it might be doing more harm than good. But how come? Well, Africa's got a serious problem. It can't produce much stuff on its own. Most of the aid they get is finished products, not the tools or resources they need to make stuff themselves. And here's the kicker. African countries have crazy high birth rates, with not enough jobs or schools to go around. It's like a runaway train. These sky-high birth rates are out of control. So what happens? All this aid just ends up fueling population growth, without really helping Africa move forward as a society. More people means more mouths to feed, which means even more aid is needed. And the more aid that pours in, and the population keeps booming. Africa's stuck in a cycle of dependence, always needing a helping hand. Sadly, Africans are still stuck in the same old rut of poverty. What's worse, the fledgling local industries they've worked so hard to build up are being totally steamrolled by all this foreign aid. It's like Africa's been given a sugary sweet poison cocktail. Looks like a lifesaver on the surface, right? But here's the kicker. It's actually trapping Africa in a nasty loop where more help just snowballs into bigger messes. Talk about a disaster. Africa doesn't just need fancy finished products. It needs the building blocks of industry, like solid infrastructure. It's only by investing in power infrastructure and tech education that we can help Africans truly become part of the modern industrial world, instead of just being on the receiving end of handouts. Modern education and jobs can really open people's eyes to the world today. It gets them excited about living in the 21st century and gives them the drive to take charge of their own future. These are exactly what African societies need most to modernize. Looking at the big picture, putting money into Africa's industries will pay off way more for investors than just selling finished goods that end up in Africa via government or charity purchases. Some folks think that all this massive yearly aid to Africa is just a sneaky plot by big Western corporations to keep their power. Their goal? Nip Africa's budding industries in the bud. All to keep their top dog status in the industry game. But hey, some folks think that's just tinfoil hat territory. They argue that big businesses deliberately crushing African industries? Nah, doesn't add up. Whatever the real deal is, it's clear that aid to Africa is wrecking their economy, and we need to fix it ASAP. We've got the power to pull Africa out of this mess, so it's on us to step up and make a change. It's a win-win, good for humanity in the long run, and makes business sense too. After all, teaching Africa to fish beats handing out fish every day, right? It's a sweet deal for everyone, especially developing countries like those in Africa. Now, when it comes to poverty, sure, there's all sorts of disasters that play a part. But here's the real kicker. They're missing modern ways of getting things done. Let's dive back into that healthcare shortage example. The meds for common illnesses are cheap, and shipping them to African capitals isn't a big deal cost-wise. So far, so good on the budget front. But here's the real head-scratcher. How do we get these meds to the middle of nowhere? Who'll manage distribution? What about behind-the-scenes issues? How do we solve this? Look, you don't need fancy schmancy doctors to treat everyday illnesses, but you gotta have at least some folks with basic medical know-how, right? And where the heck do we find these people? Oh, and here's another curveball. Some villagers are super skeptical about modern medicine. What if clashing with medical staff? If we cure them, that's not the end. Then the key question, how to teach them to stay healthy. Juggling these tasks is trickier than just handing out pills. Most villages in Africa don't have a single well. Village ladies balance massive buckets on their heads daily. They spend hours casually strolling to and from the river, fetching water over and over again, and they don't even bat an eye. You might wonder, why don't they dig a well? Surprisingly, there's no reason at all. It just never crossed their minds. Plain and simple. And get this, even when they totally could. I saw this kind of thing firsthand when I was working in Africa. These villages were financially stable. Their proximity to our project site boosted their economy. Our project provided money and job opportunities, allowing many to earn steady income. With their earnings, they built fancy brick houses, but weirdly enough, digging a well never crossed their minds. Want to hear something really mind-blowing? Some villages actually got wells thanks to foreign aid programs. But guess what? They just let them fall apart. No maintenance, nada. And just like that, the ladies were back to their long treks to the river, happy as clams. They've never heard of making life easier foreign to us Chinese. It's as if their daily water fetching marathon is some sort of sacred ritual or something. When some of my Chinese buddies visited Africa and witnessed this craziness, they were absolutely livid. They went off about how lazy Africans must be. If truly lazy, wouldn't they prefer digging a well to save effort? Don't you think? At the end of the day, it's all about a lack of understanding. They just don't get why wells are important, why they need upkeep, or why saving time and energy matters. That's the real issue in African society that needs some serious thought and change. Getting folks to warm up to modern living takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. You got to take it slow, spread the word bit by bit. I mean, if digging a simple well is such a hassle, imagine trying to build a whole hydroelectric plant. Don't get me started on laying railway tracks. The pushback would be extreme. It's enough to make gung-ho investors run for the hills, faster than you can say profit. Trying to make things happen in Africa? Tech skills are the least of your worries. What's throwing a wrench in the works? Those pesky non-tech roadblocks. So what's the deal with Tanzania? How come it's crushing it with their modernization game compared to their neighbors? Credit President Nyerera's era for that. He focused on grassroots life, setting up local organizations extensively. Sure, these groups weren't flawless. They had their quirks and hiccups. But hey, they did the trick. Most folks got looped into the national system thanks to these bad boys. It's like the government had a direct line to every nook and cranny of the country. No more drowning in a sea of unsolved problems or hitting that I give up wall. But wait, plot twist. These days, the big dogs can't just waltz in and take over the factories and farms. Tossing in more aid, that might just KO the local biz scene. And don't even get me started on their outdated organizational playbook. Modern know-how's trickle-down effect is questionable. Mix these three ingredients, and what results? You end up with today's bizarre world, where some are swimming in cash, while others can't even scrape together enough for a meal. On one side, folks in rich countries are overfed, twiddling their thumbs, getting all worked up about race and gender, and other highfalutin postmodern stuff like elitism, just to kill time. People in poor countries struggle to make ends meet, barely scraping by day to day. And all the stuff that's supposed to close this gap, spreading industry around, moving money, and good old-fashioned hard work, well, somehow it always gets tangled up in a mess of roadblocks. So what can we do about this totally unfair setup? Look, this isn't a quick fix. We're in for the long haul here, not just a roll up your sleeves and it's done kind of deal. This widening gap isn't something we can pin on any one person. It's all part of this big, messy picture of global capitalism. So, first things first, we need to buckle up for the long ride. We can't expect to wave a magic wand and poof, all these problems disappear. Now, on a bigger scale, our country's been plugging away at this. And as someone who's been in the trenches of the Belt and Road Initiative, I gotta say, I think this approach is all about trying to bridge that crazy gap. We're not kidding ourselves that we'll wipe out poverty worldwide in a hot minute. But we're doing our darndest to bring both sides closer together. Here's the plan. Tap into rich countries' extra production power to boost struggling nations, helping them rise from poverty to economic health. It's like we're building a bridge between have and have-nots. And it doesn't matter how fancy it looks, as long as it gets the job done, you know? But here's the kicker. We quickly realized that even in the same neighborhood, countries can be as different as night and day. Some countries are rock solid, with governments that really know how to get things done. They've got a handle on any social drama, and their people are chill. They're already making solid progress towards becoming a modern industrial nation. For foreign investors, it's like hitting the jackpot, a perfect spot to rake in the dough. Other countries have political scenes that are a three-ring circus. The government's grip on power is laughably weak. Social tensions are a ticking time bomb. The population issue is snowballing out of control, getting bigger by the minute. Take industrialization, for instance. They might crash and burn before the intro credits even roll. For investors, it's a total danger zone, no doubt about it. The reasons? Oh, they're a dime a dozen. But at the end of the day, it's the everyday Joe and Jane who shape a country's destiny. As friendly foreigners dropping by, we've got to play it cool and respect their turf, you know? Just here to lend a hand if they want it. No butting in or calling the shots. Okay, for us Chinese, dealing with the mishmash of African countries, each with its own flavor of risk, throwing money at everything might not be the smartest move. A savvier strategy? Cherry-picking a few countries that have got their act together and giving these China-friendly nations a financial boost with laser-focused investments. It's a win-win. Safe, super efficient, and sets a killer example for others to follow. In the industrial game, it's smart to bet big on a few star players. Giving VIP treatment to the students is way more bang for your buck than tossing cash at the class slackers. This focused investment strategy is all about playing by the economic rulebook while giving these countries' infrastructure and energy sectors a supercharged shot in the arm, ensuring projects start smoothly, then providing ongoing support, nurturing their industries from zero to hero. And these top-off-the-class countries, they're already bursting with potential, just waiting to explode onto the scene. Smart investments can work wonders. For these countries, a short burst of intensive funding could totally jumpstart their modernization process, helping them power through those tough early stages. It's about getting at least one industry off the ground and thriving, instead of having resources trip each other up. We don't want everyone sinking in the quicksand, right? Plus, it's a win-win for investors. They're not just gaining an edge in the market, they're also raking in high returns, and as a bonus, keeping troublemakers at bay. Now to Africa, China's like this far-off land from a whole different world. We're worlds apart culturally, and totally different from those old-school colonial powers. When we're out there on the world stage, we're all about respect first, you know? Sure, we've got economic muscle, but that doesn't mean we can just waltz into Africa and start bossing everyone around. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could turn a couple countries in the region into real success stories? These success stories can spark a chain reaction of industrial growth. They'll pave the way for their neighbors to build their own industrial foundations. Together, they'll learn to navigate the new economic landscape. It'll help shift their mindset from dog-dog competition to cooperation, putting them on track for steady growth and prosperity. Smart, low-cost investments lead to better industry planning. It's all about seizing the right opportunities, knowing when to cut losses. Letting the market do its thing is crucial. But a totally hands-off approach can lead to some pretty reckless and short-sighted decisions. Projects that take ages to turn a profit and risky energy infrastructure often get left in the dust because nobody wants to foot the bill. Without these big projects backing them up, smaller industries are left high and dry. Let's face it, the future's looking pretty bleak. New power plants can spark a boom in electricity-hungry industries in no time. As soon as new highways are ready, folks can't wait to get wheels. But flip that around, and it's a whole different story. Imagine if we had a big-picture mastermind calling the shots on investments, making sure every sector from roads to factories gets its fair share of the pie. Then boom, the results would be mind-blowing. We'd be hitting two birds with one stone, investors would be grinning, and countries would be winning. Smart planning nips wasteful building in the bud and keeps things from going overboard. Avoid construction mistakes foolproof. Best part? your money won't go down the drain. Looking at the big picture, this focused approach of gradually scaling up investments might just be the ticket to better outcomes. For us youngsters, getting involved in the Belt and Road Initiative is like hitting two birds with one stone, lending a hand and giving ourselves a leg up. For folks struggling in less fortunate parts of the world, nobody's dreaming of going to bed hungry night after night. While we're talking about excess capacity for those battling constant illness, this could be the lifeline they've been praying for. Sure, our cultures might be worlds apart, and what makes us happy differs for African friends, but ultimately we're all human. Everyone deserves the right to make their own choices, whether that's chilling by the river all day, every day, without a care for fancy stuff. But here's the kicker. You gotta have options to begin with. Once you've lived different lives, you might happily choose to chill and soak up the sun. It's way better than being stuck in a boring, clueless routine from day one, without any say in the matter at all. For us, getting involved in the Belt and Road Initiative is like finding our mojo again. I bet you've been there too, right? Sure, when you're wiped out from work, a quick breather does the trick. But that soul-crushing feeling when your job seems pointless? Now that's the real killer feeling stuck in a never-ending cycle of corporate nonsense. But here's the cool thing about Belt and Road projects. We can see firsthand how producing real stuff isn't just meaningful. It's crucial for most folks globally. As makers of stuff, we're in demand. We're actually making a real difference in this world. How cool is that? But hey, if we want to really shine and show what we're worth, just putting in the hours and upgrading our tech isn't going to cut it. We've got to keep shaking things up in how we work together and get savvy about global connections too. And when we're up against a ton of tricky little issues, we've got to stay tough, but roll with the punches. That's how we'll really knock it out of the park. Looking way down the road, it's hard to say if there's a limit to how far Africa's industry can grow. And if there is a ceiling, who knows how high it is. But let's be real, we've got bigger fish to fry right now than worrying about that. What we do know for sure is that Africa's future potential is totally tied to how much we put into it. We've got this. Boosting Africa's industrial growth more efficiently could be a game changer. We'd see organizations pop up faster than ever. Africa could find its footing in no time. Getting on the fast track to progress, we could tackle the poverty and job crunch from booming populations. These challenges would be nipped in the bud. With more to go around, we'd see fewer heartbreaking stories of want and need. Africa's potential is sky high, and we've barely scratched the surface. It's a land where every possibility is just beginning to unfold. Any path taken with determination is a step up. The sky's the limit. Sure, the challenges are huge, but so are the dreams. Africa's story, it's tough, but oh so hopeful. Let's face it, we can't build paradise on Earth or dream up some fairy tale ending to history. That's just not how it works. That's the thing about progress, it's all about personal growth, you know? Just when we think we've put out one fire, boom, 100 more pop up. It's like playing whack-a-mole with problems. When it comes to Africa's journey forward, I gotta say, this ancient continent is gonna face a ton of hurdles down the road. Some of these challenges? Yeah, we've been there, done that in our own growth story. Many might be new even for us, uncharted territory. So how do we tackle all this stuff? That's the million-dollar question. Look, we're only human, so it's not like we have all the answers. But here's the one thing I'm betting on. 8 billion brains are way smarter than 3 billion. It's just simple math. When that day comes, watch out, world. In a world of true abundance, it'll be way easier to shake things up and blaze a new trail than in our current world of fake plenty. Trust me, it's gonna be a breeze. Smash like, subscribe for more, join my African adventure. Catch you next week. Peace out.